the first question was what happened to the village that the family came from, and the answer is it's still, I mean, it's all really still there. There are not any Jewish people there anymore. We went to the synagogue in that village, and it had been turned into a big boiler room by the Russians, so it was still providing some kind of heat, not the heat of prayers, but some kind of heat, which I thought was sort of lovely. But it's all still there, it's just that there's this whole part of the population that used to be part of everything that just is gone. So
mostly just taken away to the concentration camps, or was it an actual war going on?
I think the question is what happened to them, where did they go? And I think that it was probably a combination. My family was actually there, they left before World War II. My grandmother was born there in 1920, and they left like 6 or 7 years later. So there were a lot of people, I think, that did leave, that knew that things were not going so well, and they came here, or they went, somewhere in South America. I have other relatives who lived there. But yeah, I think also some people got carted out, and that, yeah. And second question is if I had any literary inspirations, which I definitely do, although I think when I was writing this book, everybody said, so Marquez, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm not reading any of that right now, because I have to, if I read 100 Years of Solitude before I wrote this book, I would be like, oh, it's over, can't do it. He did such a better job at that amazing thing than I ever could have. And then I did finally read it later and realize that they're completely different books, but still I feel like the writers that I love the most, I have to be careful about how much I read them, because they get into my head and then I'm not sure whether that was my idea or that other person's idea, and it gets me all turned around. So I would say that Marquez is a favorite, Michael Chabon is a big favorite, and I'm sure there's lots of, I still have good ideas from him, I'm sure. Yeah. Yes?
So I understand the inspiration from your grandmother and that part, but did you also study history of the area to kind of set it in context, or is it really just more imagined and fabricated, or how does reality and imagination mesh, I guess?
You guys are not. What parts came totally from my imagination, and did I study the history, and was I going to fit that in? And the answer is both are true. When I picked the book up again, I decided that I better not have any notes or books or research around me, because I was going to feel like, well, I want this to happen in the story, but it can't because it doesn't fit. And so I left all that out for many drafts. And then finally, much, much later, I did want it to be a story that could have happened. There's nothing so fantastical in the book that it's out of the world that we live in. So I wanted the history to sort of be a possibility if somebody was going to look into it. But I also wanted it to kind of be peripheral. I felt like the war, I didn't want to write the war itself, and that's part of why I moved the story to World War II instead of World War I when my family was actually there, because I felt like we all have that story so clearly in our minds that I could count on my readers to bring that with them, so that it wouldn't, there's nothing about it in the book itself. So that's sort of how I wanted to gesture to kind of the ghost of history more than to have the actual events on the page. That was on there.
It sounds as if in the writing of the book that you delving very deeply into things that you experience, almost sort of transpersonal kind of process. And I wonder what, on that level, what kinds of things you learned about the culture there, or what were the things that really struck you about trying to create a world that was better than what you lived in?
The question is, what did it feel like, and what did I learn from trying to construct a world that was better than the one we currently live in? I think we probably all have some sort of feeling of what that would be like. Just the world always feels sort of like a stuck place, I think, sometimes, and you wish that you could just start over and imagine a new place. And I think, I don't know if I learned anything exactly. I feel like I learned that it felt really true to me, that it was a thing that I think I don't have an experience of the world actually falling apart around me and feeling like there truly is no safe place on earth. But I think I don't know, I guess I feel like we live in our minds as much as we live on the ground, and that the experience of the stories we tell ourselves is almost as true as anything that's happening around us. So that felt like something that no matter what the situation is, we all know what that feels like. Alright,
In terms of your writing process, did you write with a plot in mind when you first started, or did you just write and when something sort of emerged from it?
My question is if I wrote with a plot in mind or if I just started writing. I had the sort of stepping stone, so I knew that my great-grandmother had been given to her aunt and uncle when she was a little girl because they didn't have any kids, and so they just sort of handed her over. And I knew that she then later wandered through the forests of nowhere. She didn't know where she was, surviving on tree bark with her children, while her husband was a prisoner of war in Italy, having just the loveliest time ever. It was great. They had nothing ill to say of him. He had pasta, he had ladies, it was warm, it was the happiest time of his life. So I had these sort of stepping stones in my head. So I knew I was going to get to those places, and I knew that they were kind of the stories, they were sort of the through line, and my job was to figure out how a story that would make those things possibilities. How could that possibly have happened? And what are the things that sort of stitch that all together? So it wasn't really a plot exactly, but it was kind of those like, I knew where I was going next. A little bit.
Is